So I'm here this morning to talk about the opportunities and challenges and trends in the serious games business worldwide. There's a somewhat emphasis on North America because I'm most familiar with it, but I run a serious games association in the United States, and I invite any of you to come and participate in our annual conference, which will be in July in Los Angeles. And to submit any games that you do for our international award program, which will help you with visibility for your games in the United States. We look at the market as having 6 segments. You're probably familiar with them. Education really meaning use in schools, corporate uses for games, medical and healthcare with splits between professional training and products that are made for consumers that are dealing with health issues, government, military, a wide, broad category called associations and organizations, or NGOs in many cases, and a new and emerging category that is an opportunity that is games for visitor centers and museums and tourism. And by the way, I've made my slides available to the conference, and if any of you want a copy of the slides, bring me a business card after the session and write, slides on it, and I'll be happy to send them to you so you don't have to take notes on the presentation. How big is this market worldwide? Well, it really depends on what you're counting. And for sure, games that are used for knowledge transfer, for learning, for training, encompass at least almost a $5 billion market. But a lot of people say it's as big as 12 billion plus with quite a bit of confidence if they're including learning devices. By contrast, this does not include military simulations, which in itself this year will be about $9 billion. But at least that's kind of a closed ecosystem. In each country, there's a half a dozen maybe people who are developing simulations for the military. So we don't really count it in the opportunity for most of you. But as you can see, if we put it all together, we are really becoming a significant sized market, and that's going to cause more attention to other people to get into it, to know about it, and those first movers of you can be more successful. So I will talk mostly this morning about game-based learning. This is, as I said, games that are designed to educate, involving knowledge transfer across all market segments. So I'm talking about games that are used in corporations to educate either customers or employees or some youth, as well as games that are in schools, for instance. And here's a market forecast by Ambient Insight, which does a really good job, the best job that I've seen in terms of looking what the market is. Together, we expect a compounded annual growth of about 15% a year. Interestingly enough, the simulation-based learning games are growing faster, and they represent a larger amount because the cost of developing a simulation game is much greater. But that's really because they were secondary to the market. Of course, the military has been using simulation-based training for a long time. It's newer to other markets and way too expensive usually for things like schools. So the school market is smaller but has many, many more products. When you look across the world, Latin America is actually the continent in which there is the fastest growing market for games for learning. North America is spending much more, and we're talking here, as I said, games that are not simulations. We're talking about simulations. And you can see that there is an interest there as well as in Asia. In game-based learning, Asia still has made one of the largest investments, and North America has been steadily working on their games for learning business. Western Europe is actually not doing as much in this sector, which I found surprising. And I'll talk a little bit about why in a minute. So why is it important that we develop games for learning? It's because people respond to games and there is truly learning going on. And just as an example, in the school market, Children pick up, as you know, pick up a smartphone and begin to play with it, and they know how to play digital games by the time they're 3 or 4 if you're letting them be exposed. More kids are doing that than swimming, riding a bike. In fact, 91% of kids in the age group of 2 to 17 are gamers, are regularly playing games. And this is a faster adoption than for many types of products. 69% of kids aged 2 through 5 can use a mouse, but only 11% can tie their shoes. I can relate to that because I remember skipping home from kindergarten when I finally had learned to tie my shoelaces. In the education market, which we're defining as schools, K through 20, even K through graduate school, divides into 6 segments again. Preschool, age 2 to 5, and the after-school and at-home learning market are the fastest growing and largest markets. K through 12 has gotten into it. I'll talk a little bit about where. The 3 markets that I think are the newest opportunities are higher education. For instance, no one was developing games for the 2- and 4-year colleges, and one of the earlier development companies into serious games in the United States, Muzzy Lane, has focused on this and has McGraw-Hill as a client. And they are really creating a niche that no one else has gone after, and they're creating games like Marketing 101. Trade and professional services. I was astounded to hear that people were thinking about games in this sector, but Pearson's dominant there. They need people to help them create games for these trade sectors. And then testing services. And what I mean by this are the services, and I don't know if you have them here, but those tutoring services, if you will, to help kids learn the things that they haven't had experience with. My daughter, for her MBA program, took a GMAT testing service program to help her be prepared to go to one of the top business schools. And she never would have gotten in without it, but she hated the training. And if it was done with games, so it made it fun for her to learn, I'm sure she would have had a much easier job qualifying for the GMAT. Some of the trends that I see in schools, in the United States, game-based learning is just about ubiquitous in grades, early grades, like let's say K, even preschool, through about grade 4. But it starts to taper out in middle school because we have not figured out how to do games to fit in with every curriculum, part of which is that even if you teach literature to 9th graders, do you teach the same literature every time? Some of them. But especially in the United States, they've had trouble finding something. Muzzy Lane, the company I explained before, was having trouble trying to do a game for history. And it was because it didn't fit all those history teachers. But manufacturers are trying to make it easier by providing volume discounts on devices. Google Play, Apple, you can look into that. And one of the interesting trends I saw this year is that the Murdoch company, Amplify, has been hiring developers all over the United States, and I'm sure their European counterpart is doing the same, to develop games which will be provided to a school in a digital library format. The school will contract for X number of games, and these games are designed to be what a library is, in that sense, only something to do outside of school. And they're encouraging teachers not to worry about integrating games in the classroom, which is, of course, a controversial topic about whether that's good or not. But they're encouraging schools just to say, hey, kids, on your school tablet, there's a library of games that you can play on the weekend. Go look, play what you like. And they're finding that that encourages them to look at games for math, for instance, because they're games, and have fun and increase their knowledge of the school products. The best use of games, because of these different strategies, is still being debated. And that's because there's a lack of pedagogical research. I'm told by those people who really believe in the right kind of research that you must have 2 side-by-side focus groups with the same training materials, one in the form of a game and one in the traditional technology or training, and then measure the results. Because it's true that kids respond to something different. And so all those teachers that are saying, oh, my kids love this math game, can't truly prove yet that using the game to teach the math is more effective than if they'd gone through the school book as usual. So we lack this research, and I think it's the biggest challenge we have, and because it's expensive, people don't want to do it. I talked to someone from United Health. They're developing games to help people with lifestyle changes to make them healthier. They don't want to pay for the research to be sure that games work. So this is our challenge for those people who are saying, I'm not going to get into buying games because I don't know whether they're effective. Meanwhile, though, teachers in the United States believe that games are making a difference, and so they are developing their own ways of using them. Minecraft, for instance, has been adopted by many teachers, and there were several speakers at my conference this summer talking about how effectively they were getting kids to learn and enjoy school by bringing this into the classroom. And even in high-risk situations, I don't know how you refer to that over here, but we're talking about youths that just want to drop out of school, that are doing drugs, that are having problems with life. They're using violent video games and showing how there can be learning derived from them. And so there really is a belief in the teachers in the United States that this can revolutionize education. Math seems to me, to be the topic where in school there is the most ability to prove success, and where more and more math teachers are believing that they can use games to better teach that topic. One of the other interesting trends is that there's now some very easy to use mobile game building tools. So more people are getting into mobile on the development side, but even kids are getting into it. We have 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds developing games. And so in the United States also, kids that are in science are taking computer programming in high school, which was not a course which was offered when I was there. And in surveys about what kids want to have for a career, 50% of the kids that are choosing science are saying, I want to go into games. A lot of those kids want to go into entertainment games. I think we need to convince some of them to go into serious games because that's where the jobs are going to be in the future. There's a game like GameStar Mechanic that is teaching kids to do programming in 5th and 6th grade. So there really is an opportunity for kids to participate in their own education and for us to do it at a higher level. In the United States, parents are very involved in their kids' early education. That is not, I understand, true in Europe or Scandinavia. But working parents, I have 2 double parent kids. We don't have maternity leave like you do. So both of my 4 kids, of 2 that I actually have biological, are all working, and they're all concerned about their little babies learning, and they're already looking at games, and the kids aren't even 2. They're not letting them be exposed to games, but they believe that this is going to be helpful to their kids. Everybody's talking about fast start. Mobile games, therefore, is the fastest growing category in the preschool, in the whole games for learning school market. But experts do say, look, don't expose your kids to games until they are at least 18 months. Games that offer parental involvement are also growing. Some of you may know Knowledge Adventure, which is a game company that is for school and math and other topics and has struggled, but they're finally coming into their own and raising money again. Their Math Blaster years ago was a breakthrough. Now they are because they offer parental involvement, that you buy the game for your child, the child plays a game, and you get a report on how they're doing. And the game winds back and forth to help kids that have trouble with certain concepts do it again. US venture money is flowing fastest into this preschool market. Mobile games, mobile really is the platform. That's both the smartphone and the iPad or other tablets. And they outsell, the products outsell any games that are available just on the web or PC or the console. And early childhood educational games are in the top 10 mobile apps on the iTunes Store. Why? Because even if you're not seeking to improve your child's early education, you're finding something they can do in the restaurant to keep them quiet. So it's really a huge category that's bigger than anything else. And the venture capitalists are taking note of this. It's because 15 of 24 games funded in last year were developing educational games for mobile devices, and all of them were creating games for young children. So venture money usually flows toward purchase. New protocols are needed, though. For instance, we've had quite a controversy in my hometown of Los Angeles because the Los Angeles County school system in California bought tablets for everybody, and they had them coded so that the kids couldn't access the internet. They could just do the classroom assigned work. Well, within one day, those high school kids had broken the code. And they were disappearing, and they lost a bunch of them, and oh my goodness. The school needed to have a lot more education and preparation about how to appropriately use those tablets in the school. Now, who's getting into this market? The major entertainment game companies, which of course eye the market for games, have been looking at it, and they've usually done it by acquisition. But for instance, Electronic Arts, that got involved with Institute of Play, which was an early school-oriented developer nonprofit development company, became Glass Lab, became part of EA, and is working on an interesting game. But EA has spun them out. They're saying, go over there and work. We're only going to give you a certain amount of funding. The entertainment game companies are not jumping in. They've been looking at the education games, just not doing it yet. ESL, English as a Second Language, is hot. Rosetta Stone is the largest revenue brand in that market, and they are starting to get into games. And as I mentioned, test consultancies, Kaplan EdTech is definitely looking at it, has been looking at it for about 3 years. By the way, when I mention all of these are companies that you could approach because most of them are not doing development in-house. They're hiring outside development companies. So McGraw-Hill, as I mentioned, has found a niche developing for the 2- and 4-year college. Houghton Mifflin acquired educational game company, and it's focusing on math and vocabulary literacy for once again, the early grades. Pearson has not really come out and said too much about what they're doing, but they have all these content partnerships, and what do you think that means? In terms of the business model, most everyone is offering it on a subscription basis. They'll offer volume subscription to schools. The ones that are in the public space sometimes go with advertising base. They haven't had as much success. Really, it's usually the parent that signs up for subscription-based. They'll offer a free trial of the game, and then the child gets to a certain level and is having a lot of fun, and then the parent has to put in the credit card so that the child can pay more missions, more lands, more levels, whatever it is. Moving away from the school market, let me talk a little bit about the corporate market. There are many different areas where games are being offered by those really educated companies, and there are not too many of them, but employee training certainly is one of them. And so they're using it for recruitment, leadership training, required training like compliance, factory safety, emergency safety in the plant, and another interesting area is employee motivation, and then also product promotion. Some of the companies that have been in very early, like IBM, are also offering consultancy because they have more experience and more knowledge, and they're getting into much higher levels of use of knowledge. And you should listen to Phaedra's speech this afternoon if you're interested. As I said, a very hot area is leadership training because games can let young leaders experience situations that they couldn't create in the real world and be afforded to do it. For instance, they can look at whether they can offer a young leader the chance to strategize about 2 or 3 subsidiaries, whether they should be merged, whether one of them should be spun off, punch in the numbers through the game, and look at what would happen in terms of savings or what would happen in terms of disaster. So it's a very interesting area. They also, the leader learns, but also the business learns. And recently, some of the young people that I've been talking to also have to play games as they apply for jobs, because the way that they respond to different situations presented to them when they're interviewing tells the company a great deal about what kind of employees they will be. So it's very interesting how young leaders are being impacted by games. Collaboration and teamwork, of course, is a very important concept. That's why it's big in the business schools, and games can actually be used internally in companies to help with that. Now, one of the more interesting games that I heard about was for a large retail company. They have set up a program where all employees that are in a position to upgrade sales are being asked to participate in a game that ranks them against their other peers about how they're doing for upselling things like credit cards or selling service contracts, or in any way promoting additional sales for the retail customer with that person who's in there just making other kinds of sales, purchases, I mean. And the result is that if they do well, they earn vacations, they earn recognition, which of course is very important, and they get to travel. Gamification is an interesting term, and we've been talking about that even internally. Corporate people seem to respond to the fact that if something that they're doing is gamified, that it's going to do better. But there is a debate about whether regular training that's used all the time can simply be gamified with some game mechanics, like adding rankings, adding badges or recognition or something, or whether a game should really be developed from scratch. And in the developer market, most people say gamification is just bad, just bolting on legacy training products. On the other hand, there have been some companies that have been very successful gamifying training that is already in use, and you can't knock success. I think the question is whether or not, in the end, this will hurt our market for development from scratch. I think the corporate market offers a lot of opportunity because there's not really very many companies that are yet engaged in hiring companies to do games for them. As I mentioned, IBM is using games in all parts of the company. However, the majority of US companies, for instance, are not doing it. And actually, it is European countries, especially from the Netherlands and from some parts of the UK, that have successfully landed contracts for corporate development before the US developers even sort of woke up and just realized that they were losing business to companies that were already farther along with applied games, or games with impact, or games with purpose, or serious games, whatever you call the term. And just to show you the opportunity for it, more than 25 billion is being spent on e-learning, digital learning, online, someplace on the computer, which could be turned into games. Learnovate, which is part of a UK consultancy in Ireland, did a survey, and it was kind of interesting what they found out, that companies, large corporations that they were surveying, only 20% were using serious games in any way, but 50% of the companies are actually looking into it. And all, though, are looking at that challenge that I mentioned, hard evidence of whether or not serious games do work. But they do recognize, they do believe that games are more engaging, they can be more effective in training, and there's an increased pressure on all of those chief learning officers to have return on investment for the training expenditures. They're just not all dipping in yet. So I think there is absolutely an opportunity there. The same is true when this consultancy contacted vendors who supply hardware platforms or development platforms, or in some way a supplier or a vendor to the industry. They are getting an increased demand, and only 10% of those that inquire currently have games. So again, down here, leadership training, soft skills training, and compliance are three areas that people are quite interested in. We just have to figure out how to do a game that sells to more than one company, because that is a serious problem for all of you. You do something for one company and you make a margin of profit, or maybe you don't because it's your first game. What do you do to really, like Microsoft, sell more software? The healthcare market. I know I'm moving quite fast, so as I said, I'll make these slides available. There are three main categories in the healthcare market where learning is going on by games. Training of medical employees. I had a surgeon speak at my conference who actually teaches laparoscopic surgery through the use of an entertainment game, and then has other training that goes on that is really impactful in terms of training those professionals to do a better job of surgery.
You can also see that we have quite
and then a lot of game professionals are in the therapeutic areas are using games. I mean, but there's dozens actually of games that are designed to help autistic patients. And again, the sad thing is, why are those games not being used across the board? Why can't we have one dominant game rather than one that's just developed for a single medical institution?
And in doing that,
and general purpose games like teaching patients about lifestyle changes they must make is another quite big category, and the medical institutions really are your client again for this. Brain fitness games are still hot. That was actually the very first category to receive funding, and Luminosity in the United States has done very well for making senior citizens, help them with memory. And as you begin to lose it at age 26 or something, by the time you're my age, you've lost it and you can't remember things as well. So I'm looking to try Luminosity in the future. The largest segment of the healthcare game market is games designed for patient education. So as I mentioned, the institutions are themselves funding it, and insurance companies have started to health insurance, obviously, insurance companies have started to introduce games. But there are also games being used by NGOs just to promote their cause, for instance, fundraising. You know, they'll use a game-based mechanic, like have people guess about just how serious a disease problem is. And there's an example of a few that have.
The customers in the end, you very seldom meet.
Some other interesting things that I've seen that don't necessarily fall into one of those categories, and you can see I've not talked about military. If you don't know about Foldit, and I've asked several people here, you need to go and look up Foldit on the web, because it's a very interesting game that solved a medical problem. Scientists at the University of Washington studying proteins in the biochemistry department asked this very brilliant game scientist if somehow he could help solve that issue, or he got interested in it, and he wrote a game called Foldit, and in just 10 days he put it out there and said, hey gamers, we're trying to solve something, and the gamers got on and they figured out the problem. And the reason this works is because you can run supercomputers doing algorithms trying to find out, you know, from a standpoint of computation why something happens, but supercomputers will never replace the brain. The brain can intuitively decide that something might work and try it, and the supercomputer does not do that. So that's how this works. And there's other examples of that. The government is now asking for gamers to participate in trying to find security problems on the internet by giving them games. The military is still using games, and I thought it was interesting to hear that the US Navy's new combat ship totally is training its sailors by a game. And this project, you know, took 7 years to develop. It was going on while the ship was being built, and it was a very interesting process. And by the way, if you're interested in this, on SlideShare is posted a very detailed slideshow on showing all of the things, the considerations and decisions that were made while they were building this ship. And games are also being used to solve fundamental education programs. One of the reasons I'm so excited about this, a Norway company that you may know that developed DragonBox spoke at my conference 2 years ago and was noticed by this brilliant scientist from the University of Washington, and they teamed up.
different locations.
Because students, as Doug was saying in the first speech, students study this in grade 1 and this in grade 2 and this in grade 3 as far as math, and yet there might be a brilliant kid in 6th grade who has the knowledge, maybe even has parental or family or just plain brain power, to be looking at concepts of math that his fellow 6th grade students couldn't possibly understand. So they've developed a game which allowed any student from kindergarten through senior and high school the ability to play the game, and as they played the game, it made them think critically, and they learned algebra concepts. So it's really quite exciting, and it helps all students begin to prepare for learning algebra that usually you wouldn't get until later grades.
And all of a sudden, this becomes...
Here's some technology you can use. The Pentagon has made a web-based collaborative program available to anybody who wants to use it. It was originally developed for different military groups to use to create collaborative simulations. And the 4-star general decided that he should make it available to academic institutions. And then once he made it available to academic institutions, he realized that it was going to go out into the marketplace. And so now it's really available to anybody who wants to go up and find it. And here are a few examples of new games. How am I doing for time? Okay? Okay. So this is going to go really fast, I think, but probably you will want to get the slides if you're interested. But here are some new games. Crafty Cut, one of the games that was developed for Amplify, is designed to expose students to the relationship between 2D shapes and 3D shapes. And it wasn't introduced for like a 10th grade level. It was introduced for K through 12 because kids at an early age can begin to notice that and develop and think critically. And it makes math fun. They don't even think that they're learning math, and definitely just don't get told that at the end. They just play and have fun. And here's another game that actually is designed to get kids oriented toward doing coding. Through critical thinking and problem solving, they begin to understand how programming logic works and think like engineers. And what a valuable tool for a young child. Many of you may know about SimCity, which of course was an entertainment game that was extremely popular, and EA, I believe, owns the rights to it because this was one of the games that they gave to this collaboration that I told you about, Institute of Play / Glass Lab, and they have now they're in development on this product which will be released this fall, which has the same sort of basic learning that you can from playing the simulation game, but it's designed to help students learn problem solving. And in the United States, having something that works with Common Core, which are the standard things, we expect kids to learn this and this and this at each age, and next generation science standards. This probably is going to get adopted into the junior high environment, which is maybe one of the first games that has more universal use across many schools and curriculums. In healthcare, the types of games that are being developed are equally as interesting. Blue Marble Games, which is also based in Los Angeles. Some of these were award-winning games in our competition. They're doing a game for older adults for exercise programs, and my kids are after me to get more exercise because I sat in a chair for too many years working. It tracks the progress. It tells the person subscribing to the medical or helping the patient with some exercise program, gives them feedback and monitors how much they participate. And it's helped a lot, evidently, with patients in programs that were having problems with potentially or falling and having to use a walker all the time. I don't know why they have such small type on this one, but it was developed by an outside contractor for the Centers for Disease Control, which has just started to do contracting for development of games that will help people understand the critical nature of some of the health problems we have in the U.S. And what you do, it operates very much like a mission-based entertainment game where they tell you that some catastrophe is happening in terms of a disease, and you have to find out the problem and solve it before everyone in your community is affected by this disease.
As a power industry, we do this.
Dapper is a web-based game created to improve outcomes of patients diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So again, very therapeutic use.
Pension funds, long-term investors.
And this is a very interesting program for doctors that helps them learn how to talk to a patient of an obese child, or, you know, and to talk very sensitively to not offend either the parent who's a little bit overweight or the child about the dangers in terms of the lifetime ability of that child.
Some of their sourcing here in Finland from Swedish.
In the corporate area,
You will see much more.
Planet Jockey is a site you might look at. They have an interesting leadership game. They did a study of Fortune 500 companies and asked them what were many of the challenges that they felt would come to a CEO, and then they developed a game where each of those challenges was adapted into a segment of the game and made all of these different challenges be something fun to learn about while it actually was training leaders.
Shows the annual Nordic consumption, how it varies.
True Office is another one that has developed a series of applications. It teaches topics like risk, compliance, security, sales, customer support, all of those kinds of challenges that come to leaders and managers in an office, and helps them learn how to deal with it. And Office Vibe is an adaptive employee engagement, which is interesting. It's really more about organizational culture. It's trying to go after the fact that you want to have employees that are generous, that are concerned, that are nice, that are collaborative, and it is that sort of game. So, and then just a couple things about museums and visitor centers, because I think it is an area. This is one that was developed by the Getty, which makes people look at the topic, look at the artwork and decide what's different in a mobile game. Art Hunters Online was an alternate reality game. I am going through this quickly. But visitors would solve the mystery of the art's whereabouts, and then they could see more. And finally, here's one that's rather local. Global Treasure is teamed with the Glasgow Museum and other economic development organizations to transform locations into free interactive treasure hunts. So something that you could look to from wherever you're from. So that's all I have, and I want to thank you for your attention. And again, if you wish a copy, give me your business card. And I'm out of time, so I don't have time for a lot of questions, but I am signed up for times during the day. You're welcome to come and see me.
We have several mining industries.